You already used one today. You probably did not think about it. You reached for it automatically, the way you reach for everything in your medicine cabinet. A headache, a fever, something that aches. You opened the bottle, shook out a small white pill, swallowed it with water, and moved on with your day. That pill has a history. Not the history you learned in school, not the story of laboratories and pharmaceutical companies and clinical trials. The real history. The one that starts not in a factory or a research facility, but in a forest, on a riverbank, in the hands of someone with no concept of chemistry, no understanding of molecular compounds, no language for what they were doing, only the observation that when they chewed the bark of a certain tree, the pain went away. That tree was the willow. That compound was salicin, which your body converts to salicylic acid, which is the active molecule in aspirin. The ancient Sumerians wrote about willow bark on clay tablets more than 3,500 years ago. The ancient Egyptians recorded it in the Ebers Papyrus around 1550 BC. Hippocrates prescribed it in ancient Greece. For thousands of years, across dozens of civilizations that never contacted each other, human beings independently discovered that the same tree did the same thing: relieved pain, reduced fever, calmed inflammation. In 1997, a Bayer chemist named Felix Hoffmann synthesized it in a laboratory and called it aspirin. It is now one of the most widely used drugs on Earth. He did not discover it. He just figured out how to make it in a factory. Here's the thing nobody tells you about ancient plant medicine. It was not guesswork. It was not superstition dressed up as healing. It was the longest, largest, most comprehensive clinical trial in human history, running for tens of thousands of years, conducted by billions of human beings across every continent on Earth, with survival as the outcome measure. You did not survive if your medicine did not work. You did not pass on knowledge that failed. The plant remedies that endured across generations, across cultures, across millennia, they endured because they worked. Not because someone believed they worked, because the people who used them lived. The evidence for this stretches back further than you might think. In 1957, archaeologists excavating Shanidar Cave in what is now northern Iraq found the remains of a Neanderthal who had been buried approximately 60,000 years ago. The burial site contained pollen from 8 different plant species. 7 of those 8 species are known medicinal plants, still used as herbal remedies today. Yarrow, groundsel, grape hyacinth, thecedra. Plants with genuine pharmacological properties. Plants whose healing functions were understood and applied by a species that was not even fully human by modern classification, in a cave in Iraq 60,000 years before the first writing was invented. That is how old this knowledge is. And it did not stop there. By 3000 BC, the Sumerians of ancient Mesopotamia had moved beyond individual remedies and were compiling entire pharmacopoeias. Among them, the opium poppy. The Sumerians called it Hud-gil, the plant of joy. They understood that it relieved pain in a way nothing else could. They cultivated it, they refined it, they passed the knowledge forward. 3,000 years later, the Greek physician Theophrastus gave the first clear written description of opium. A century after that, Dioscorides wrote instructions for preparing it that were, according to modern pharmacologists, essentially identical to modern pharmaceutical preparations. The active compound morphine was not isolated in a laboratory until 1804. Friedrich Serturner extracted it from poppy juice and named it after Morpheus, the Greek god of dreams. He did not discover what opium did to the human body. He discovered the molecule responsible. The Sumerians had been using the effect for 5,000 years. Egypt kept records, extraordinary records. The Ebers Papyrus, dating to around 1550 BC, is one of the oldest complete medical texts ever found. It's 110 pages long. It describes over 850 medicinal plants. Read it today and the names jump out at you. Aloe vera, prescribed for burns and skin irritations. Garlic, listed for infections, heart conditions, and general vitality. Castor oil, used as a laxative and to treat skin disease. Willow bark, myrrh, juniper, frankincense, mandrake. These are not primitive folk remedies. These are documented, systematically applied treatments for specific conditions recorded in a medical textbook written 3,500 years ago. Aloe vera is in every pharmacy in the world today. Garlic's antimicrobial properties have been confirmed by modern research. Myrrh is studied for its anti-inflammatory and antiseptic compounds. Frankincense, Boswellia, is the subject of active pharmaceutical research for its ability to suppress inflammatory pathways in the body. The ancient Egyptians knew what these plants did. They did not know why. They didn't need to know why. They knew the what from observation spanning generations. The why took another 3,000 years of chemistry to uncover. India developed its own tradition in parallel. Ayurveda, the knowledge of life, is an oral tradition at least 5,000 years old. When it was finally written down, starting around 600 BC, the Susruta Samhita alone described 700 medicinal plants. Among them, turmeric, recommended for wounds, digestion, and inflammatory conditions. Ashwagandha for stress and vitality. Neem for infections. Ginger for nausea and inflammation. Every single one of these has now been the subject of rigorous modern pharmacological research. Every single one has confirmed active compounds that do exactly what the Ayurvedic tradition said they did. Turmeric contains curcumin, one of the most studied anti-inflammatory compounds in modern pharmacology. Ginger contains gingerols and shogols, which have measurable effects on nausea that are now used in pharmaceutical formulations. Ashwagandha has been found to contain withanolides, which have documented effects on cortisol and the stress response. Ancient Indian physicians didn't know about curcumin or gingerols. They knew about pain and inflammation and nausea and what happened when their patients took certain plants. They built a system from observation over thousands of years that turns out to have been largely correct. China built its own pharmacopoeia independently and arrived at many of the same conclusions by a different path. The Pen Sao Qing, the classic of herbal medicine, compiled around 200 AD, but drawing on traditions stretching back thousands of years, describes 365 medicinal substances, the majority of which are plants. Among them, Artemisia annua, sweet wormwood, recommended for fever. In 1972, Chinese researcher Tu Youyou was searching for a treatment for malaria, which had become resistant to existing drugs. She went back to ancient Chinese medical texts. She found the reference to Artemisia annua in the Pen Sao Qing. She isolated the active compound, artemisinin. It worked. It worked on malaria strains that have defeated every modern pharmaceutical thrown at them. In 2015, Tu Youyou won the Nobel Prize in Medicine. She won it for reading a 1,700-year-old book. This is the pattern. This is what the history of plant medicine actually looks like when you lay it out from beginning to end. Foxglove. Rural healers in 18th century England used it to treat dropsy, the dangerous accumulation of fluid caused by heart failure. In 1785, physician William Withering documented their practice and confirmed the effect. The active compound, digoxin, is now used in hospitals worldwide to treat heart failure and irregular heart rhythms. Every hospital in the world stocks it. Cinchona bark. The Quechua people of the Amazon had used it for centuries to treat fever. Jesuit missionaries brought it to Europe in the 1600s. The active compound, quinine, became the primary treatment for malaria. It is still used today. The Quechua knew what it did before anyone in Europe had ever heard of malaria as a disease category. Madagascar periwinkle, used in folk medicine across the world for diabetes and infection. In the 1950s, researchers studying it discovered two compounds, vincristine and vinblastine, that are now among the most important chemotherapy drugs in existence, used to treat leukemia, Hodgkin's lymphoma, and other cancers. A folk remedy became a cancer cure. This is not coincidence. This is not luck. This is the accumulated pharmacological knowledge of the entire human species, built through tens of thousands of years of systematic observation, encoded in tradition, and passed forward through generations precisely because it worked. The World Health Organization has noted that 11% of the 252 drugs it considers essential are derived exclusively from flowering plants. That number is almost certainly an undercount. Hundreds of additional drugs are semi-synthetic modifications of plant compounds or synthetic compounds designed to mimic the behavior of molecules first found in plants. The pharmaceutical industry did not replace plant medicine. In a very real sense, it learned to read it. The most extraordinary thing about all of this is not the plants themselves, it is the people who first used them. Think about what that process actually required. You are a human being in 50,000 BC. You have no chemistry, no microscopes, no concept of molecules or receptors or pharmacological action. You have a sick person in front of you, you have a landscape full of plants, and somehow, through observation, through trial and error, through the slow accumulation of knowledge passed from person to person, generation to generation, you figure out that specific plants, in specific preparations, at specific doses, do specific things to the human body. Not magic, not superstition, observation, the oldest and most powerful scientific method there is. Every plant on this list, willow, poppy, foxglove, cinchona, aloe, turmeric, artemisia, periwinkle, was identified, isolated, tested, and standardized by people with no formal education, no laboratories, and no vocabulary for what they were doing. They were doing it anyway. They were doing science with their hands and their eyes and the accumulated knowledge of everyone who came before them. The irony is that we almost lost all of it. As pharmaceutical companies emerged in the 19th century, plant medicine was increasingly dismissed as primitive, unscientific, beneath serious study. The knowledge held by indigenous healers, the knowledge that gave us morphine and artemisian and digoxin and quinine, was treated as superstition. Much of it was never recorded. Much of it was lost when the communities that held it were destroyed, displaced, or assimilated. Ethnobotanists estimate that hundreds of pharmacologically active plants in the Amazon basin alone have never been studied. Indigenous healers who know their properties are dying. The knowledge is dying with them. We are burning libraries we have not read. The next time you take aspirin for a headache, you are participating in a tradition that is at least 3,500 years old. The willow tree that provided the compound it contained was known to the Sumerians, the Egyptians, the Greeks, and dozens of cultures in between, all of whom chewed its bark and felt their pain ease and understood, on whatever level was available to them, that the tree was doing something real. Every major painkiller traces back to a plant. Every cardiac drug traces back to a plant. Every anti-malarial drug traces back to a plant. The people who discovered these things did not have white coats or funding grants or peer-reviewed journals. They had forests, they had deserts, they had riverbanks and mountain slopes, and the urgent problem of a sick person who needed to get better. They figured it out. They always figured it out, and they left the knowledge for us. Hidden in papyri and clay tablets and oral traditions and folk remedies and the notebooks of country healers, the entire pharmacopoeia of the human species, written in the oldest language there is, the language of plants. We are still learning to read it. That is all for today. If this changed how you look at the pills in your medicine cabinet, subscribe and consider supporting the channel.